The hill made a sound that shouldn't have existed beneath 6 feet of snow. Jack dropped to one knee as the blizzard howled across the ridge. His fingers sank into the drift, and a strange rush of air brushed his skin dry, steady, almost warm. Beside him, his German shepherd clawed at the frozen ground until blood stained the snow. Then the dog barked again, staring at something hidden beneath the mountain, and Jack realized they weren't alone out there after all. What do you think Duke sensed first? The blizzard came down out of the Bitterroot Mountains like it had been waiting all year for this one night. Snow tore across the ridgeline in long white sheets. Wind screamed through the pines and rattled the bare branches until they sounded like bones knocking together in the dark. Jack Mercer lowered his head and kept moving. One step, then another, then another. Beside him, Duke fought through the drifts with the stubborn determination that had carried him through nearly a decade of service. The German shepherd's dark coat was powdered white with snow. Ice clung to the fur around his muzzle. His injured back leg dragged slightly every few steps, but he never complained, never slowed. Neither of them did. Not anymore. The old Ford pickup sat somewhere behind them, abandoned on a narrow mountain road that had disappeared beneath 6 feet of fresh snow. The engine had died almost an hour ago. Jack had tried everything. Battery, fuel line, starter, nothing, just silence. Now the storm owned the mountain, and the mountain was trying to kill them. Jack adjusted the strap of his backpack and scanned the terrain through the blowing snow. Old habits. Always scan, always observe, always know where the danger might come from. Even after 13 years, Afghanistan still lived inside his muscles. A sudden gust howled through the valley. For half a second, it sounded exactly like rotor blades. Jack froze. The noise hit some buried part of his brain. His heart jumped. His shoulders tightened. His eyes searched the sky automatically. Black Hawk, inbound. LZ, secure. The memory vanished as quickly as it came. Only snow remained. Only darkness. Only wind. Jack released a slow breath. Not tonight, he muttered. Duke looked up at him. The dog had learned that tone years ago. It usually meant a bad memory had found its way back. I'm fine, buddy. The lie disappeared into the storm. Jack continued forward. According to the GPS, Elk Ridge sat less than 6 miles away. 6 miles wasn't impossible. Not under normal conditions. But the GPS screen flickered, then froze, then went black. Jack stared at it for a moment. Of course. He slipped it into his pocket. The mountain had taken that too. Snow stung his face. His gloves were wet. His boots felt heavier every minute. He knew the signs. He had seen hypothermia before. In training, on deployments, during winter rescue operations, the body didn't quit all at once. First came the numbness, then the confusion, then the temptation to stop moving. That temptation was already whispering in his ear. Ahead stood a cluster of pines bent sideways by decades of mountain wind. Shelter. Temporary, but shelter. Jack found himself staring at them longer than he should have. A dangerous thought. Just 5 minutes. Just sit down. Rest. Catch your breath. Duke suddenly barked. Sharp, loud, close. The dog shoved his nose into Jack's leg. Hard. Jack blinked. The trance broke instantly. He looked down. Duke barked again. This time, angrier, almost offended. Yeah, Jack said quietly. I know. Men who sat down in storms like this often never stood back up. Duke knew it too. The old dog pressed forward through the snow. Then something changed. His ears lifted. His entire body stiffened. Jack noticed it immediately. Years of working around military dogs had taught him how to read them. This wasn't fear. This wasn't exhaustion. This was detection. Duke had found something. The German shepherd suddenly turned away from the route toward Elk Ridge. He pulled hard toward a steep hillside covered in snow. Jack tightened his grip on the rope. No. Duke pulled harder. The dog barked once. Then again. Then again. Jack looked toward the hill. Nothing. Just snow. Rock. Trees. But Duke kept pulling. His behavior became more urgent with every second. The dog wasn't guessing. He was certain. Jack studied the area. The wind moved differently there. Strangely, snow near the slope drifted in unusual patterns. The air currents seemed broken somehow, interrupted, as if something underneath was changing their direction. Duke suddenly lunged forward. The rope slipped through Jack's glove. The dog raced uphill. "Duke!" No response, only barking, relentless. Jack cursed under his breath and followed. The climb nearly finished him. His legs burned. His lungs ached. The cold reached deep inside his chest. By the time he reached the dog, Duke was already digging. Not casually. Not playfully. Furiously. Snow flew behind him. His paws struck the frozen ground again and again. Blood appeared where the ice cut into the pads of his feet. Still, he kept digging. Jack knelt beside him. "Duke!" The dog barked directly at the ground. Jack brushed away snow with his glove, then stopped. There. A crack. Thin. Dark. Hidden beneath the drift. He leaned closer. For a moment he thought it was just another fracture in the rock. Then he felt it. Air. Not much, but enough. A faint current brushed across the back of his hand. Dry. Warmer than the storm. Jack frowned. That wasn't possible. He cleared away more snow. The crack widened. The air became stronger. His pulse quickened. Somewhere beneath the hill, something was moving air. The wind screamed across the mountains above them. But beneath that sound came another, a hollow rushing noise. Low, steady, almost like breathing. Jack stared at the slope. The realization arrived slowly. Then all at once, this hill wasn't solid. Something was hidden underneath. Duke barked again and dug even deeper. Snow collapsed away from a flat wooden surface. Jack's eyes widened. Wood. Not stone. Not earth. Wood. Perfectly straight. Man-made. His numb fingers brushed away another layer. An iron hinge appeared. Then a rusted metal strap. Then part of a handle. For a moment, neither man nor dog moved. The storm howled around them. The mountain groaned beneath the weight of snow. And buried inside the hillside sat a door. A real door. Hidden where nobody should ever have found it. Jack swallowed. His exhaustion vanished. His military instincts woke up instantly. Unknown structure. Unknown history. Unknown occupants. Observe first. Move carefully. But survival overruled caution. Because if there was shelter behind that door, it might be the only reason either of them would see morning. Duke stood beside him, breathing hard. Snow covered his muzzle. Blood stained one front paw, yet his tail moved slowly, confidently, like he had finally found what he had been searching for all along. Jack reached out. His fingers closed around the frozen handle, and for the first time that night, hope appeared. Small, fragile, but real. Buried beneath the mountain, waiting for them. 3 days earlier, the sky above Miller Basin had been clear. The mountains stood sharp against the horizon. Snow still rested high on the peaks, but down in the valley the pastures were brown and quiet, waiting for winter's first real strike. Jack Mercer was on the roof of a livestock shed when he heard the truck pull into the yard. He didn't look up immediately. He drove another nail, adjusted a loose board, checked the alignment one last time. Only then did he climb down. A climb. The man waiting beside the truck wore an expensive coat that didn't belong anywhere near a working ranch. Travis Nolan, the new owner. Jack had seen him twice before. Both times from a distance. Both times long enough to know exactly what kind of man he was. A man who looked at land and saw numbers. Not memories. Not people. Numbers. Duke stood from his spot beside the workshop and watched Travis carefully. The German Shepherd didn't bark. He simply observed, the same way Jack did. Travis removed a folder from beneath his arm. "We need to talk." Jack glanced toward the dark clouds building over the western ridges. A storm was coming. Everybody in Montana could feel it. What about? The property. Jack already knew. The answer arrived before the question. Men like Travis never drove 30 miles into the mountains for small conversations. The two walked toward the porch of Jack's cabin. The structure wasn't much. 1 bedroom, wood stove, a small workshop, a place Jack had rented for nearly 11 years, long enough to fix every pipe, every fence, every broken hinge, long enough to believe he belonged there. Inside, Duke settled near the door, while Travis spread papers across the kitchen table. Jack remained standing. Old habits. Never sit when you don't know where a conversation is going. Travis tapped a document. "The redevelopment starts next month." Jack said nothing. "The hunting lodge, the guest cabins, new access roads." Still nothing. Travis finally looked up. "This cabin is inside the construction zone." Silence settled over the room. The clock on the wall ticked softly. Duke's ears shifted. Outside, wind brushed against the windows. Jack stared at the papers. Then at the man across from him. How long? 48 hours. The answer came fast. Too fast. Like it had been rehearsed. Jack nodded once. Not because he agreed. Because he understood. The decision had already been made. Travis slid another paper forward. A relocation payment. Jack didn't touch it. Take it. No. It's more than fair. Jack looked around the room. At the old bookshelf his wife had painted. At the coffee mug still hanging beside the stove. At the blanket folded over the chair she used every winter. 5 years. 5 years since cancer had taken her. Yet somehow she still lived inside the cabin, in 100 tiny ways. Travis followed his gaze, then shrugged. Loyalty doesn't transfer ownership. Jack finally met his eyes. Neither man blinked. Then Travis delivered the sentence Jack would remember for a long time. Gratitude has no legal value. No legal value. The room went quiet again. Duke rose slowly. Not aggressive, just alert. Jack reached down and touched the dog's neck. A silent command. Easy. Duke obeyed instantly. The moment passed. Travis gathered the papers. I'll send a crew Friday morning. Then he left. The truck disappeared down the gravel road. The dust settled. The valley became quiet again. But something inside the cabin had changed. That night, Jack packed alone. A toolbox. Clothes. Medical supplies. Cold weather gear. Military habits returned automatically. Inventory. Weight distribution. Priorities. Everything had a place. Everything had a purpose. Duke followed him from room to room. Watching. Waiting. Understanding more than most people would. The sun disappeared behind the mountains. Darkness filled the valley. The first gusts of the incoming storm rattled the cabin walls. Jack sat at the kitchen table long after midnight. A cup of coffee cooled beside him. Sleep never came. It rarely did, especially when the weather turned bad. Especially when memories were waiting. At 2:17 in the morning, a loose shutter slammed against the outside wall. Bang. Jack was moving before he woke up. Chair crashing backward, hand reaching toward a weapon that wasn't there. Eyes searching corners, doorways, windows, threat, contact, clear left, clear right. The cabin vanished. For one terrible second, he wasn't in Montana anymore. He was back in Afghanistan, back inside a damaged compound, back hearing incoming fire, back losing friends he still dreamed about. Then Duke's nose touched his hand. The present returned. The cabin returned. The mountains returned. Jack lowered himself slowly into the chair. His breathing steadied. Duke rested his head against Jack's knee. Neither moved for a long time. Outside, snow finally began to fall. Large flakes at first. Slow. Gentle. The kind of snowfall that tricks people into thinking winter is beautiful. Jack looked through the window. Toward the mountains. Toward the storm. Toward whatever came next. By dawn, his truck would be loaded. By noon, he would leave. Because sometimes, a man doesn't lose his home all at once. Sometimes, he watches it disappear one room at a time. And by the time the storm arrived, Jack Mercer would have nowhere left to return to. The next morning, the mountains looked deceptively peaceful. Fresh snow covered the valley in a blanket of white. The fences around Miller Basin had disappeared beneath smooth drifts. Smoke rose from chimneys in thin gray ribbons that twisted lazily into the pale winter sky. It looked beautiful. Jack knew better. Winter was never beautiful when it wanted something from you. His truck was loaded before sunrise. A toolbox, 2 duffel bags, a sleeping roll, emergency supplies, enough food for several days, nothing more. The rest stayed behind. The bookshelf Emily had painted, the old rocking chair, the kitchen table where they'd shared 27 years of meals. Some things weighed too much to carry. Duke jumped into the passenger seat without being asked. The dog settled onto the worn blanket that always traveled with them. Jack started the engine. For a moment, he simply sat there, looking at the cabin, the porch, the window beside the wood stove, the place that had felt like home long after his wife was gone. Then he shifted into gear. The truck rolled away. Neither man nor dog looked back again. For the first hour, the drive was uneventful. Snow fell lightly. The road remained visible. The radio issued occasional weather warnings. Jack listened with half an ear. His attention stayed outside. Old habits again. Observation. Assessment. Planning. The sky bothered him. Storm fronts moved differently in the mountains. A civilian saw clouds. A combat engineer saw patterns. The western horizon was disappearing. Fast. Too fast. Duke noticed it too. The German shepherd had been sleeping most of the morning. Now he sat upright, ears forward, watching. Jack glanced over. "You see it too, huh?" The dog didn't move. 3 miles later, the road began climbing toward a narrow pass. The snow intensified. Visibility dropped. The radio dissolved into static. Then came the first real warning. The wind. It hit the truck broadside, hard enough to shake the entire vehicle. Jack tightened his grip on the steering wheel. Another gust followed. Stronger. Snow blasted across the windshield. The mountains vanished behind a white curtain. "Come on," Jack muttered. The truck climbed higher. The storm climbed faster. By the time he reached the ridgeline, the world had become almost unrecognizable. Road markers disappeared. Fence posts vanished. Even the trees looked like ghosts. Then the engine coughed. Once, twice. Jack frowned. Not now. The truck lurched, recovered, then lost power again. Warning lights flashed across the dashboard. Duke immediately stood. The dog sensed the change before the vehicle stopped moving. Jack guided the truck toward the shoulder. The engine died completely. Silence. Only wind remained. Jack tried the ignition. Nothing. Again. Nothing. One more time. Still. Nothing. He opened the hood. Snow immediately poured inside. The cold hit like a slap. For 30 minutes he worked. Fuel line, battery connections, starter, every possibility, every check. Nothing. The truck wasn't going anywhere. Jack stared down the road. Elk Ridge sat less than 6 miles away. Under normal conditions. The problem was that nothing about this was normal anymore. The storm had arrived early, and it had arrived angry. Duke jumped down beside him. Snow instantly covered the dog's paws. The shepherd turned in a slow circle, nose working, testing the air. Jack pulled out his GPS. The screen flickered. Coordinates appeared, disappeared, reappeared, then froze entirely. Seconds later it went black. The battery had finally surrendered to the cold. Jack slipped it back into his pocket. One less tool, one more problem. He looked toward the road, then toward the mountains. The decision wasn't difficult. Staying with the truck meant freezing. Moving meant possibility. Combat engineers learned a simple rule during survival training. Movement creates options. Stillness creates problems. Jack adjusted his pack, checked Duke's rope, secured his gloves, then started walking. The first mile wasn't terrible. The second was worse. By the third, the storm owned everything. Snow reached his knees. The road disappeared completely. Even his own footprints vanished moments after he made them. Jack kept moving by instinct, following terrain, following memory, following experience. Duke stayed close, at least at first. Then, something changed. The shepherd stopped. Jack took 3 more steps before noticing. Duke? The dog wasn't looking at the road anymore. He was staring west, toward the mountains, toward a line of dark hills barely visible through the storm. His ears stood rigid, his body tense. The same posture Jack had seen dozens of times during military patrols. Detection, interest, certainty, Duke growled softly, then pulled against the rope. West, away from Elk Ridge, away from safety. Jack frowned. Wrong direction. The dog pulled harder. Snow swirled around them. Wind screamed through the valley. Still, Duke insisted. West, 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 west. Jack studied the landscape. Something bothered him. The snow near the hills moved differently. The wind patterns looked broken there. Interrupted. Not as exposed. Not as deadly. Duke barked once. Sharp. Urgent. Then he pulled hard enough to nearly tear the rope from Jack's hand. Jack looked toward the road, then toward the hills. His military training weighed options automatically. Road. Open terrain. Maximum wind exposure. Or hills. Tree cover. Possible shelter. Unknown risks. The answer arrived quickly. The road no longer offered survival, only a slower death. Jack exhaled, then nodded once. All right, buddy. Duke immediately surged forward. The dog didn't hesitate, didn't look back, as if he already knew exactly where they needed to go. Jack followed. neither of them realizing they were about to leave the road forever. And somewhere beyond the snow-covered hills, something hidden beneath the mountain was already waiting. The climb toward the western ridge took more from Jack than he expected. The snow was deeper off the road. It swallowed his boots past the ankles, then past the shins. Every few steps, hidden rock rolled beneath the powder and forced his knees to catch his weight before he went down. Duke moved ahead, low and steady, breaking trail with his chest. The old shepherd's injured back leg dragged more now. Jack saw it every time the dog climbed over a buried root or pushed through a drift too deep for him, but Duke never turned back. Not once. The ridge ahead was a dark shape behind the white storm. Pines leaned out of it like black ribs. The wind broke against them and scattered sideways, softer than the open road but still sharp enough to cut. Jack's breath came rough. In, out, count it, control it. That was what he did when his body started arguing with him. In Afghanistan, he had once crossed 300 yards of open ground under heat so fierce the air shimmered like glass. Now, he was crossing a Montana hillside in snow so thick it erased the world 5 yards ahead. Different place. Same rule. Keep moving. Duke stopped suddenly. Jack nearly walked into him. The German shepherd stood facing a slope of pale rock and buried brush. His nose lifted, then dropped. His ears angled forward. A low sound rolled in his chest, but it was not a threat growl. It was recognition. What is it? Duke didn't look back. He stepped forward and began digging. Fast, furious. Snow sprayed behind him in hard bursts. Jack blinked against the wind. Duke, leave it. The dog dug harder. Duke. Still, nothing. Jack took one step toward him, and the world tilted. Not the mountain, Jack. His left boot slipped on a patch of ice hidden beneath the drift. His knee hit hard. Pain shot up his leg. He caught himself with one hand, but the glove sank into powder and struck stone underneath. For a few seconds, he stayed there on all fours. The cold pressed against his face. The wind roared over him. Somewhere inside the storm, a light flashed. Yellow, white, then gone. Jack froze. The ridge vanished. The snow became dust. The wind became rotor wash. A bright flare burned over a village wall in Helmand province. Someone was shouting contact. Someone else was yelling for a medic. His hands were in the dirt, not snow, dirt. He could smell diesel, metal, burnt plastic. A helicopter thudded overhead, so low, it shook his teeth. Then teeth grabbed his sleeve. Duke! The dog pulled once. Hard. Jack's eyes snapped open. Montana returned in pieces. White storm, black pines, blood in his mouth from where he had bitten the inside of his cheek. Duke pulled again. Jack forced air into his lungs. Clear, he whispered. The word came out before he thought about it. Duke barked in his face. Sharp, angry, alive. Jack pushed himself up. His legs trembled beneath him, but they held. I'm up, he said. I'm up. The dog released his sleeve and spun back toward the slope. Then he resumed digging. This time Jack didn't stop him. He crawled beside Duke and started clearing snow with both hands. The snow near the base of the hill was packed harder than the rest, as if wind had been pressing it down for years. Beneath it lay frozen brush, then gravel, then something dark. Jack brushed faster. Wood appeared, old, blackened by age, straight-edged, man-made. His fingers found iron, a strap hinge, then another. Duke barked and clawed near the lower seam, until red marks stained the snow around his paws. Easy, Jack murmured, though his own hands were shaking now. He cleared the outline, a door, heavy timber, set directly into the hillside, half buried under decades of snow, pine needles, and mountain dirt. Jack stared at it. No cabin nearby, no road, no fresh tracks. Nothing to explain why a door should be here. Hidden in a ridge no one had reason to climb. The wind slammed into his back. That decided things. Mystery could wait. Cold would not. Jack gripped the iron handle and pulled. Nothing. He braced his boots, leaned back, and pulled harder. The door groaned. A deep wooden complaint rose from the hillside. Ice cracked along the edges. The opening widened by an inch. Then 3. Then 6. A dark gap appeared. Air moved out. Not warm like a house, but dry, still, protected. Jack felt it on his face and nearly closed his eyes. Duke shoved his nose through the opening and whined once. Not fear. Invitation. Jack pulled again with everything he had left. The door opened wide enough for a man and a dog. A narrow passage waited beyond it, descending into darkness. Cedar beams framed the walls. Stone steps dropped into the hill. The storm noise faded just beyond the threshold, as if the mountain itself had swallowed the sound. Jack stood there for 1 second too long. Unknown structure, confined space, no visibility. Could be unstable, could be occupied, could be anything. Duke stepped inside, then turned and looked back. His eyes caught the faint gray light from the storm. Steady, certain. Jack gave one last look over his shoulder. The road was gone. The truck was gone. The life behind him was gone. Only the storm remained. He ducked through the doorway, pulled Duke in after him, and forced the heavy door shut. The blizzard disappeared. Not quieted, disappeared. The sudden silence hit harder than the cold. Jack stood in the darkness with one hand against the door, listening to his own breath. Duke moved ahead 3 steps, then stopped. Jack pulled a small flashlight from his coat pocket and struck the switch. A weak beam cut through the black. Stone stairs, packed earth walls, old cedar supports, and below them, deeper inside the hill, a darkness large enough to hold a secret. Jack swallowed once, then started down. The stairs were cut deeper than he expected. Not a few steps into a root cellar. Not a shallow storm room dug by somebody with a shovel and good intentions. These steps dropped with purpose, one after another, into the dark belly of the hill. His flashlight beam shook against the walls, not from fear, from cold. His fingers had started coming back to life, and the pain arrived in sharp little pulses under the skin. He flexed them twice around the flashlight and kept his other hand near Duke's collar. The dog moved ahead of him, nose low, ears forward, no growl, no raised hackles. That told Jack more than the flashlight did. Duke had been trained around people, vehicles, explosives, fuel, food stores, strange rooms, and stranger men. If something was wrong, the dog usually knew before Jack had finished naming it. But Duke was calm, alert, searching. That was different. The tunnel smelled of dry earth, cedar, old smoke, and time. No rot, no mold, no sharp bite of animal waste. Whoever built this place had kept water out, and in the mountains that meant they had known what they were doing. Jack reached the bottom step and paused. He lifted the light. The tunnel opened into a chamber so large the beam could not touch all 4 walls at once. For a moment, he simply stood there. The place beneath the hill was not a shelter. It was a hidden station. Thick cedar posts rose from the packed earth floor to support the ceiling. Stone walls curved along the sides, lined with shelves from waist height to overhead beams. On those shelves sat sealed glass jars, canvas sacks, metal tins, folded wool blankets, lanterns, coils of rope, boxes of nails, and old tools rubbed dark with use. At the center of the room stood a cast-iron stove. Behind it, a broad limestone wall climbed into the shadows, darkened by years of heat. A stovepipe ran upward into a narrow shaft cut through the rock above. Jack moved slowly. Step. Look. Listen. In the army, he had cleared enough rooms to know a structure always spoke before people did. Dust patterns, footprints, airflow, broken edges, fresh movement. This place spoke in silence. Nothing had been disturbed recently. No fresh tracks. No scattered supplies. No smell of another fire. Only stillness. Duke crossed the chamber and sniffed the stove, then the woodpile beside it. Dry cedar had been stacked beneath oil-treated canvas, protected from damp air. Jack touched one split log and felt the clean dryness under his fingers. He almost laughed. Dry firewood, in the middle of a blizzard, buried inside a hill nobody knew existed. He knelt at the stove and opened the firebox. Old ash rested inside, powdery and dry. He checked the pipe with the flashlight, then looked up toward the ceiling vent. Clear enough. Maybe. He didn't trust maybe. Not underground. Jack found a narrow iron rod hanging from 2 hooks beside the stove and pushed it upward into the pipe. Ice cracked somewhere high above. A small rush of air moved through the chamber, faint but present. Good. He worked quickly after that. Kindling. A strip of cotton from an old rag. Match. Flame. The cedar caught with a soft crackle. Smoke curled upward, hesitated, then pulled into the pipe and vanished. Jack kept his eyes on it. 1 minute. 2. No backdraft. No smoke pooling at the ceiling. Only a thin sound of fire beginning to live. The chamber slowly changed. Not warm, not yet, but less hostile. He removed his wet gloves and set them near the stove. Then his boots. Steam rose from the leather as heat touched them. His toes burned as feeling returned, and he clenched his jaw until the first wave passed. Duke settled against the limestone wall, but only for a moment. Then his head lifted. Jack noticed immediately. What now? The dog stood and walked toward the far side of the chamber. His steps were stiff from the cold. One front paw left a faint red mark where the ice outside had cut him. Still, he moved with focus, nose tracing the lower shelves, then the wall beyond them. He stopped in front of a section covered by rough boards. At first glance, it looked like simple storage backing. Duke barked once, low, controlled. Jack pulled on his boots without tying them and crossed the room. The boards were old, but not structural. They had been placed to hide something. The nails were dark with age. The fit was too neat. Jack ran one hand along the seam. There, a gap. He wedged the iron rod under the first board and pried. The wood protested, then gave. A strip pulled loose. Cold dust fell into the beam of the flashlight. Behind the boards was another door, smaller than the one outside. Metal, painted army green, so old it had turned almost gray. Jack went still. On the upper corner, beneath a crust of dust, white letters had been stenciled by hand. C.R.S. 1951. Duke whined softly. Jack brushed more dust away with his sleeve. Below the letters was a second marking. Not a warning, not a name. A symbol. A star inside a circle. Faded but unmistakably military in style. Jack stared at it for a long moment. The storm above them no longer felt like the strangest thing on that mountain. He found the handle. It resisted at first, then turned with a dull metal click. The small door opened inward. Beyond it waited another room. Narrow. Dry. Undisturbed. His flashlight beam crossed over a metal desk, stacked wooden crates, rolled maps, and a footlocker with brass corners. On the desk lay a canvas-wrapped bundle, tied with cord. Jack stepped inside carefully. Duke stayed beside him, close enough that Jack could feel the dog's shoulder against his leg. He untied the cord. Inside were papers, old, yellowed, protected. The top document carried the same marking, C.R.S., Cold Ridge Shelter. Jack read the words once, then again. His eyes moved down the page. Supply inventory, winter occupancy limits, ventilation instructions, emergency route notes. Then his light landed on a leather-bound journal resting beneath the papers. A name had been written across the front in faded black ink, Harold Vance. Jack picked it up slowly. The cover felt dry and fragile in his hands. Somebody had built this place. Somebody had prepared it. Somebody had expected a winter bad enough to need it. And now, decades later, a homeless old veteran and his injured dog had found it buried beneath a mountain during the worst storm either of them had ever seen. Jack looked down at Duke. The dog stared back, eyes bright in the lantern glow. Outside, the blizzard raged over the bitterroots. Inside, under stone and earth, Jack Mercer opened Harold Vance's journal and began to read. The pages crackled softly beneath his fingers. The leather cover had survived surprisingly well. Whoever built this place had understood preservation. Moisture was the enemy of almost everything. Food, wood, steel, memories. Jack settled into a chair beside the desk. The fire from the main chamber cast a warm orange glow through the doorway. Duke lay nearby, stretched across the floor with his injured paw tucked beneath him. The dog looked exhausted, but his eyes never completely closed. Always watching, always listening. Jack opened to the first page. The 12th of January, 1952. The handwriting was neat and deliberate, the kind produced by a man who expected others to read his words long after he was gone. Snow reached the roofline today. Lost another family north of Timber Creek. Jack read the sentence twice, then continued. The journal wasn't dramatic. That somehow made it more powerful. No complaints, no self-pity, just observations, facts, records, survival. Harold Vance wrote about temperatures, snowfall, food stores, and structural improvements. He documented airflow calculations, drainage solutions, insulation methods, and fuel consumption rates. The entries read less like a diary and more like a field manual. Combat engineer, Jack recognized the mindset immediately. Different war, same mentality. Identify problem, develop solution. Keep people alive. A few pages later, Harold described the storm that had changed everything. The winter of 1952 arrived early. Roads vanished. Supply wagons stopped. Entire ranches became isolated islands, buried beneath snow. Families froze inside cabins built to fight ordinary winters, but not extraordinary ones. One entry stopped Jack cold, built thicker walls, lost more heat. He stared at the line, then read the paragraph beneath it. Harold explained how traditional cabins failed during severe mountain storms. More walls meant more exposure. More corners meant more places for cold air to enter. The solution had not been building upward. It had been digging downward. Use the earth itself. Reduce exposure. Control airflow. Store heat in stone. Jack looked around the underground chamber. Everything suddenly made more sense. The limestone wall behind the stove, the ventilation shafts, the drainage trenches. This place wasn't luck. It was engineering. Another veteran had solved the same problem decades earlier. Jack turned the page. A faded photograph slipped free and landed on the desk. He picked it up carefully. 5 men stood beside a half-finished hillside entrance. All wore work clothes. 2 wore military jackets. 1 held a shovel. Another held a German shepherd. Jack smiled faintly. The dog looked remarkably like Duke. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. Duke lifted his head as if sensing attention. "You've been doing this longer than I thought, huh?" The shepherd's tail thumped once against the floor. Jack returned to the journal. The entries became more personal as the years passed. Names appeared. Families, children, neighbors, people rescued during storms, people who didn't make it. One passage held his attention longer than the rest. The 3rd of February, 1954. Shelter housed 22 souls tonight. 1 newborn, 3 elderly. Everyone warm, everyone fed. Worth every hour spent digging. Jack sat quietly, after reading those words. The fire crackled somewhere beyond the doorway. Wind moaned faintly above the mountain. But down here, beneath tons of earth and stone, the storm felt distant, contained, almost irrelevant. For the first time since Emily died, a strange feeling settled inside him. Not happiness. Something quieter. Belonging. As if another man across 70 years understood exactly what it felt like to carry responsibility long after everyone else stopped paying attention. Jack flipped deeper into the journal. Near the back, the handwriting grew shakier, older. The final entries had been written by a man who knew time was running short. One page contained only a single paragraph. "If another hard winter comes, do not keep this place for yourself. The mountain belongs to no man. Neither does shelter." Jack stared at the sentence. Something tightened in his chest. He thought about Travis Nolan, about the cabin, about being pushed aside, about spending years fixing things nobody appreciated. Harold could have hidden this place forever. Instead, he built it for strangers. The realization sat heavily in the room. Duke rose and crossed to him. The shepherd pressed his head against Jack's leg. The familiar weight grounded him. "Yeah," Jack said quietly. "I hear you." The dog remained there, steady, present, the way he always was whenever old memories started wandering too close. Jack closed the journal and looked around the hidden room. Maps covered one wall. Supply inventories filled shelves. There were engineering sketches, weather records, and maintenance notes stretching back decades. This wasn't just a shelter, it was a legacy. A message passed from one veteran to another. Outside, the storm continued to strengthen. Snow piled against the buried entrance. Wind hammered the mountainside. Yet down here, time felt suspended. Jack carried the journal back to the main chamber. He fed another piece of cedar into the stove. Heat slowly filled the room. Duke curled beside the limestone wall again. Within minutes, the dog was asleep. Jack sat across from him, watching the rise and fall of his breathing. The old shepherd had saved his life twice in a single day. First, by refusing to let him stop moving, then by finding the hidden door. Without Duke, neither of them would be here. The realization settled over him like a blanket. Outside, winter was trying to bury the mountain. Inside, warmth held its ground. Hours passed. The fire burned lower. Jack eventually drifted into the first real sleep he'd had in weeks. No helicopters, no gunfire, No nightmares, just silence. Then, bang, his eyes snapped open. Instantly, the chair nearly tipped backward. Adrenaline surged through him before he was fully awake. Duke exploded to his feet, ears forward, body rigid. 2. The sound came again, not from inside the shelter. From above, near the entrance, 3 slow impacts. Bang, pause, bang, pause, bang. Jack looked toward the tunnel. Duke was already staring in the same direction. Someone was outside. Jack did not move for one full breath. Then the old training took over. He lowered the lantern shade, reducing the light. He stepped away from the center of the chamber and moved along the wall, keeping the stove between himself and the tunnel. His eyes swept the shelves, the corners, the doorways, clear. Duke stood at the base of the stairs, silent now, body angled forward. Not a threat posture. Not exactly. More like urgency. The knocking came again, weaker this time. 2 hits, then nothing. Jack took the lantern and climbed the steps slowly. Each board creaked beneath his boots. At the top, a thin line of cold leaked around the buried outer door and cut across his face. He pressed one hand against the timber, listened. At first there was only the storm, then a voice, faint, almost swallowed. Please. Jack lifted the wooden bar and pulled. The door fought him. Snow had packed against the outside, sealing the edges. He put his shoulder into it and shoved. The wind tried to tear it open the moment the gap appeared. A blast of snow burst into the tunnel. Jack braced his boots and widened the opening. 2 figures collapsed through. An old woman first, bent nearly double, wrapped in a coat crusted white with ice. In her arms she held a little girl whose head lolled against her shoulder. Jack shut the door with his back and slammed the bar into place. The storm vanished again. The old woman sagged against the wall. Cabin roof came in, she whispered. We saw smoke. Jack knelt beside the child. The girl's face was pale. Her lashes were clumped with frost. Her small hands were tucked inside stiff mittens that had frozen into shape. Duke moved in close. The old woman tried to pull the child back. It's all right, Jack said. He's with me. Duke lowered his head and sniffed the girl's cheek. Then, without command, he pressed his warm body against her legs. Jack glanced at him. Good dog. What are your names? The old woman swallowed hard. Eleanor Brooks. This is Lily. She's 8. Jack slipped off one glove and touched 2 fingers lightly to the side of Lily's neck. Pulse. Weak, but there. How long were you outside? Eleanor's answer came broken. Don't know. The clock stopped. Maybe an hour. Maybe 2. Too long. Jack moved fast. Not frantic. Fast. He carried Lily down the stairs, careful not to jostle her limbs. Eleanor followed, one hand dragging along the wall to keep herself upright. The moment they reached the main chamber, Eleanor stopped. Her eyes moved over the shelves, the stove, the blankets, the lamps, the dry wood. What is this place? Jack set Lily near the stove, but not too close. Something we found. He pulled blankets from a shelf, checked them for dampness, and wrapped the girl loosely. He removed her mittens with care. Her fingers looked too pale. Do not rub. Do not shock with heat. Warm slowly. Jack had seen cold injuries in mountains, deserts, and field hospitals, where men pretended they were fine until they couldn't stand. He filled a tin cup with water from a covered barrel and set it near the stove until it warmed. Duke stayed pressed against Lily's side. The little girl's eyelids fluttered once. Eleanor sank to the floor beside her and covered her mouth with both hands. She made no sound. That was often how relief arrived when it came too late to be graceful. Jack placed the warm cup into her hands. Small sips. Eleanor nodded. Her hands shook so badly water spilled over the rim. Jack pretended not to notice. Lily stirred after several minutes. A soft breath escaped her, then another. Duke lifted his head. The child opened her eyes just enough to see the dog beside her. Dog, she whispered. Jack exhaled slowly through his nose. His name is Duke. Lily's fingers twitched toward the shepherd's fur. Duke did not move. He simply lowered his head within reach. The little girl touched one ear, then closed her eyes again. But this time, her breathing was steadier. Eleanor leaned forward until her forehead almost touched the blanket. Thank you. Jack looked away. He had never known what to do with gratitude. Out there, in the storm, the world was still white and violent and lost. Down here, a child was breathing because a dog had barked at a hill. Jack stood and checked the stove. The fire was holding. The draft remained clean. He added one small piece of cedar, not too much. Too much heat too fast could bring moisture into the chamber. Harold Vance had written that in the journal. Already the old man's words had become instruction. Eleanor watched him work. "You live here?" Jack almost smiled. "No, ma'am." "Then why were you here?" He looked at Duke. The shepherd's eyes were closed now, though his body stayed curled around Lily like a guard at post. "He found it." Eleanor followed his gaze. Something shifted in her expression. Not disbelief, wonder. The hours passed slowly. Lily warmed piece by piece. Color returned faintly to her cheeks. Eleanor took off her frozen coat and hung it near the entrance tunnel with Jack's help. The storm hammered the hidden door above them, but its sound stayed distant, muted, like a nightmare heard from another room. Sometime near dawn, Eleanor spoke again. "There are others." Jack looked up. She held the cup in both hands. "The McKenna place lost power before we did. The road to Elkridge is gone." "I saw no lights down valley." Jack said nothing, but his eyes moved to the shelves. Food, blankets, water, fuel. Then to Harold Vance's journal lying open on the desk. "If another hard winter comes, do not keep this place for yourself." Duke lifted his head before Jack heard anything. The dog looked toward the tunnel. His ears rose. A second later, far above them, beneath the storm, another knock sounded against the buried door. This one was louder. And not alone. Duke was already halfway up the tunnel before Jack reached for the lantern. The old shepherd moved with a limp now, but his body still carried purpose. His ears were fixed on the buried door, and every few steps he looked back at Jack as if to hurry him along. Jack climbed the stairs with one hand on the wall. At the top, the knocks came again. Harder. 3 fists this time, maybe 4. A man's voice cracked through the wind. "Help! Anybody in there?" Jack lifted the bar. The moment he opened the door, the storm threw 2 men into the tunnel. One was a hunter in a torn canvas coat, beard crusted with ice, rifle slung uselessly across his back. The other was younger, maybe 30, carrying an old woman across both arms. Her face was buried against his chest, and her boots dragged lifelessly against the steps. "She can't walk," the younger man gasped. "Our stovepipe collapsed." We followed the smoke. Jack pulled them inside and forced the door shut. Duke circled the newcomers once, nose working, then barked down toward the chamber. Eleanor was already standing when Jack guided them below. Lily sat wrapped in blankets near the stove, one hand resting on Duke's fur as he passed. The hidden shelter changed after that. It no longer felt like something Jack and Duke had found. It felt like something waking up. By afternoon, more came. A ranch hand named Boyd Fallon stumbled in with frostbite along one ear and a blanket wrapped around his shoulders. Behind him came the McKenna family, from the Lower Creek Road, 2 parents and 3 children, all carrying sacks that had gone stiff with frozen flour. Near dusk, a young woman named Grace Whitcomb arrived, holding her swollen belly with both hands while her husband fought to keep her upright. Their cabin windows had blown out before sunrise. Every time someone reached the door, Duke knew before anyone else. He would lift his head, listen, then move. Sometimes he barked. Sometimes he only stood in the tunnel and stared upward, waiting. Jack learned to trust the difference. By the end of the second day, 21 people lived beneath the hill. The chamber that had once felt enormous began to shrink. Breath warmed the air. Wet coats steamed near the entrance. Children cried from exhaustion, then slept in bundles beneath old wool blankets. Men who had looked strong above ground sat quietly, with their hands wrapped around tin cups, staring at the fire like they had never seen one before. Jack did not ask to lead them. He simply started doing what needed doing. He marked the shelter in sections. Sleeping near the outer walls, food stores along the east shelves, medical corner near the desk, wet gear near the tunnel, fuel stacked by dryness, not size. He set 2 people on watch rotation, not for danger, but for airflow and fire control. He checked the stove every hour. He made sure no one crowded the ventilation shafts with blankets or crates. When people spoke too loudly, he lowered his voice. When panic rose, he gave tasks. Fold those blankets. Move that wood. Count the water tins. Keep the children away from the stove. No speeches, no drama, just order. Duke became part of it. He slept near the entrance tunnel when Jack needed warning. He lay beside Lily when her hands ached. He sat near Grace when the baby kicked hard enough to make her grip the blanket and breathe through her teeth. People began stepping around him the way soldiers stepped around a radio wire in the dark, carefully, with respect. On the third morning, the first real accident happened. A boy named Caleb McKenna, 10 years old and restless from being underground too long, slipped past the entrance watch while his father helped stack wood. He had heard the wind weaken and wanted to see daylight. Duke noticed before Jack did. The shepherd rose from beside the stove so suddenly Lily woke up. He ran for the stairs, nails scraping against stone. Jack looked up. "Duke?" Then he heard the boy scream. Jack was moving before the second scream came. He charged up the tunnel and shoved open the door just enough to see white chaos outside. Duke was 10 yards from the entrance, half buried in snow, braced at the edge of a collapsed drift. Caleb McKenna had fallen into a snow well beside a buried pine. Only his mittened hands showed above the hole. Duke had the boy's sleeve in his teeth. The dog pulled backward with everything he had. Jack clipped a rope around his own waist and threw the end to Boyd. "Hold me!" Then he crawled into the storm. Snow hit his face like thrown sand. The wind shoved him sideways. He reached Duke first and grabbed the boy's other arm. "Don't fight me," Jack said. "Let us pull." The boy sobbed once, then went still. "Good. Smart kid." Jack and Duke pulled together. Boyd hauled on the rope from the doorway. Slowly, the boy came free. But as Jack shoved Caleb toward the entrance, the snow shelf broke under Duke's back legs. The shepherd dropped hard. A sharp yelp cut through the storm. Jack spun. Duke was still holding the boy's torn sleeve in his teeth, even as his injured leg twisted beneath him. "Duke!" Jack lunged back, grabbed the dog's harness, and pulled. For one terrible second, the mountain held them both. Then Boyd's rope snapped tight, and all three of them slid backward toward the door. Hands grabbed Caleb first, then Jack, then Duke. The heavy door slammed shut behind them. The tunnel filled with gasps and crying. Jack ignored all of it. He dropped to his knees beside Duke. The dog tried to stand. His back leg buckled. A thin sound escaped him. Not a bark, not a growl. Something smaller. The chamber went silent. Jack touched Duke's shoulder, then the old scar along his injured leg. The dog looked up at him. Still alert, still waiting for the next command. Jack pressed his forehead briefly against Duke's. "Stand down, buddy," he whispered. "You did enough." But Duke's eyes moved past Jack, toward the door, toward the storm, toward anyone else who might still be out there. That was how Duke had always been, even now. Even limping, even after nearly disappearing into a snow well to save a child he had never met before. The shepherd's eyes remained fixed on the tunnel entrance, watching, listening, ready. Jack sat beside him on the packed earth floor. The shelter had grown quiet again. Caleb McKenna slept beneath 3 blankets near the stove. His mother sat beside him, one hand resting on his shoulder, as if she was afraid he might vanish if she let go. Across the chamber, Grace Whitcomb dozed in a chair while her husband kept watch nearby. Eleanor was mending a torn mitten beneath lantern light. The older ranch hands played a silent game of checkers on an overturned crate. Life, small, fragile, but alive. Jack looked down at Duke's leg. The old injury had never fully healed. Years ago, before the dog came into Jack's life, a collapsing concrete barrier at a military outpost had damaged the joint. Duke had recovered enough to work again, but not enough to forget. Now the leg had swollen. Not badly, but enough. Jack ran careful fingers along the joint. Duke winced. Only once. Then he licked Jack's wrist. The gesture hit harder than it should have. Jack looked away. He had lost too many things in his life. Friends, brothers in arms, his father. Then Emily. The idea of losing Duke settled somewhere deep inside him and refused to move. He hated that feeling, because fear was easier when it belonged to you alone. Hours passed. The storm above them showed no sign of weakening. Every now and then the mountain groaned under shifting snow loads. The sound traveled faintly through the stone ceiling, like distant thunder trapped underground. Jack made another round through the shelter. Old habits. Check supplies. Check people. Check problems before they become emergencies. The food stores remained strong. The ventilation draft felt clean. The drainage trench along the rear wall still carried away moisture. Harold Vance had built well. Very well. Yet, Jack noticed something else. People were beginning to look at him differently. Not as another survivor, as the man in charge. Nobody had voted. Nobody had asked. It had simply happened. When the fire needed attention, they looked at Jack. When someone felt sick, they looked at Jack. When another knock sounded at the door, they looked at Jack. Responsibility arrived quietly like that. Late that evening, Duke suddenly lifted his head. The dog had been asleep. Now he was awake instantly. Jack noticed. Duke? The shepherd stared toward the entrance tunnel. 1 second later, a metallic clang echoed through the shelter. A shovel, or maybe a bucket. Something falling near the storage shelves. The sound wasn't dangerous, but Jack's body reacted before reason could catch up. He was on his feet immediately, heart racing, eyes scanning. The shelter vanished. For a split second, the underground chamber became a compound wall in Afghanistan. Night patrol. Unknown contact. Potential breach. His breathing shortened. His hands curled into fists. Every muscle prepared for something that wasn't there. Across the room, Duke stood too, despite the pain in his leg. Despite the exhaustion, the shepherd moved beside Jack automatically. Partner position. Years of training. Years of instinct. Then reality returned. Boyd Fallon appeared from behind a shelf holding an empty metal bucket. Sorry, he said quietly. Dropped it. The chamber relaxed. People returned to their conversations. Jack did not. Not immediately. His pulse remained elevated, his shoulders tight. Duke leaned against his leg, grounding him. Present, real. Jack exhaled slowly. The tension drained away inch by inch. You okay? Boyd asked. Jack nodded. The lie sounded convincing enough. Later, after most of the shelter had fallen asleep, Jack sat beside the stove with a medical kit spread across his lap. Duke lay on a blanket nearby. The dog watched him carefully. You know I hate this part. One ear twitched. Jack smiled faintly. He cleaned the cuts on Duke's paws first. The ice had sliced deeper than he originally thought. Nothing serious, but painful. The shepherd endured it without complaint. Then came the swollen leg. Jack wrapped the joint with a support bandage using techniques he'd learned years ago from military veterinarians working alongside canine units. Duke sighed dramatically the entire time. You always act like you're dying. The dog's tail tapped once against the floor. Several people nearby chuckled softly. The sound warmed the room almost as much as the stove. For a little while, things felt normal. Not good, not easy, but normal. Then Duke froze, completely. Jack saw it immediately. The shepherd's head rose, ears forward, eyes fixed on the tunnel. No barking. Not yet, just focus. The same look he had worn on the mountain before finding the hidden door. Jack slowly stood. Around the shelter, conversations faded. People noticed Duke now. They trusted his instincts almost as much as Jack did. The shepherd rose carefully onto 3 good legs. Then he barked once, sharp, deliberate. The sound echoed through the chamber. A moment later came a knock. One hit, then another, then silence. Nobody moved. Jack's stomach tightened. Because there was only one group of people left out there who might still be trying to reach shelter. The people closest to the old ranch properties. The people from Miller Basin. The people connected to Travis Nolan. Duke barked again, this time louder. The storm had brought someone else to the hill, and Jack already suspected who it might be. The shelter fell silent. Even the children seemed to sense something had changed. Duke stood near the base of the stairs. His weight shifted awkwardly away from the injured leg. Pain showed now, not in his eyes, in the way he carried himself. Yet he remained focused on the tunnel, waiting. Jack grabbed the lantern. No one tried to stop him. Several people stood instead. Boyd, Eleanor, the McKennas. The entire shelter seemed to hold its breath. The knock came again. 3 slow impacts. Then a man's voice, muffled by snow, by wind, by distance. Please. Jack closed his eyes briefly. He knew that voice. When he opened them again, he started climbing. Duke followed immediately. No. The shepherd ignored him. Jack almost smiled. Some habits belonged to both of them. By the time they reached the outer door, snow had packed nearly halfway up the entrance tunnel. The mountain was trying to bury the shelter. The blizzard still had strength left. Jack lifted the timber bar. The door opened only a few inches before snow blocked it. He pushed harder. Cold exploded into the tunnel. Wind howled, and a man fell forward through the opening. Travis Nolan, For a second, neither of them moved. The last time they had stood face to face had been inside Jack's cabin. Warm walls, dry floors, legal papers. Now both men were covered in ice. Travis looked 10 years older. His face was pale. His beard carried frozen crystals. One side of his expensive coat had been torn almost completely away. Behind him stood a woman clutching a boy wrapped in blankets. His wife, his son. The boy couldn't have been older than 9. The child's eyes were half closed. His lips carried a faint bluish tint. Travis looked up. Recognition appeared instantly. Then, embarrassment. Then something else. Humility. Jack. The name sounded strange coming from him. Jack looked at the boy, not at Travis. The boy shivered so hard his entire body shook. "Get him inside." Travis stared, as if he hadn't expected that answer, as if he had prepared for anger, or refusal, or revenge. Instead, Jack stepped aside. The woman carried the child past him. Duke moved forward. The shepherd sniffed the boy once, then turned his body sideways between the child and the wind, creating a barrier. The same thing he had done for Lily. Jack noticed. So did Travis. Neither said anything. The door slammed shut behind them. The storm disappeared once more. As they descended into the chamber, conversations stopped. People immediately recognized Travis. The reaction spread through the room like a ripple across water. Faces hardened, eyes narrowed. The story of Jack losing his home was no longer a secret. Several people in the valley had known exactly what happened. Now the man responsible stood in front of them, cold, exhausted, desperate. Nobody welcomed him. Nobody offered a chair. Nobody smiled. The silence became uncomfortable. Travis noticed. "Good." Jack guided the boy toward the stove. The child's forehead felt hot beneath his hand. Too hot. Andis. Fever. Probably from days of exposure and exhaustion. The mother sat beside him immediately. Tears appeared in her eyes the moment she felt the warmth. Jack handed her water. She accepted with trembling fingers. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. Travis finally looked at Jack. "I know what you're all thinking." Nobody answered. The fire crackled softly. The storm rumbled above them. Travis swallowed. "My generators failed." His voice sounded rough. "The power went first. Nobody moved. The north roof collapsed yesterday. Still nothing. The roads are gone." The admission hung in the air. A week earlier, Travis had owned hundreds of acres, multiple buildings, heavy equipment, money. Now he stood underground, asking shelter from the man he had thrown out. Life had a cruel sense of symmetry. Jack returned to the stove, added one piece of cedar, checked the draft. Business first, emotion later. That had kept soldiers alive. It worked underground, too. Duke settled beside the sick boy. The child reached weakly toward him. The shepherd lowered his head into the small hand. Something softened in the room. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something. The hours passed slowly. Outside, the storm continued. Inside, the shelter adapted. People made room. Shared blankets. Shared food. Shared heat. Even Travis helped. He carried water barrels, moved firewood, cleaned snow from the entrance tunnel. Nobody thanked him. Nobody needed to. Near midnight, Jack completed another inspection round. That was when he noticed the first warning sign. The air felt different. Subtle, but different. The draft near the stove seemed weaker. The fire no longer sounded as sharp. A faint ribbon of smoke lingered near the ceiling before disappearing. Jack frowned. Not good. He climbed onto a crate and held the lantern near the stovepipe. The flame flickered strangely, then drifted sideways. Duke immediately stood. The shepherd stared upward. Jack's stomach tightened. Harold Vance's journal flashed through his mind. Ventilation, failure, kills, shelters, quietly, sometimes faster than cold. He grabbed the iron rod and checked the primary vent. Resistance. Too much resistance. Something blocked it. Snow. Ice. Maybe both. Outside, the blizzard had probably buried part of the ventilation system. Jack lowered the rod slowly. The shelter around him remained warm, comfortable. Safe, for now. But comfort could be deceptive. He knew that. In combat, in survival, in life. The first sign of disaster often arrived long before the disaster itself. Duke limped to his side. The dog looked up at him. Jack placed a hand on the shepherd's neck. The old instinct returned. Assess, adapt, act. Because somewhere above them, hidden beneath tons of snow, the mountain had just found a new way to threaten everyone inside. And this time, the danger wasn't outside the shelter. It was already creeping in. Jack stood beneath the stovepipe and watched the smoke. Most people would never have noticed the difference. The fire still burned. The room still felt warm. The lanterns still glowed. But survival had taught him that disaster rarely announced itself. It whispered first. The smoke should have disappeared immediately into the vent. Instead, it lingered, only for a second. Then two. Too long. Duke stared upward. The old shepherd's ears twitched. His nose lifted toward the ceiling. The dog sensed it too. Jack grabbed Harold Vance's journal from the desk and flipped through several marked pages. Ventilation, airflow, winter blockage. His eyes found the entry. A buried vent can kill a shelter faster than cold. People fall asleep before they understand what is happening. Jack closed the journal. Not good. Not good at all. He climbed onto a crate and pushed the iron rod into the vent shaft. Resistance. Hard resistance. Not wood, not stone. Ice. Snow. The storm had buried part of the system. A quiet murmur spread through the chamber as people noticed him working. Boyd stepped closer. What is it? Jack lowered the rod. The shelter can't breathe. That got everyone's attention. Silence followed. Even the children stopped talking. Jack looked around the room. 21 people had become 32. 32 lungs. 32 bodies creating heat, moisture, and carbon dioxide. The shelter had protected them. Now it was struggling to support them. Travis Nolan stepped forward. Can it be fixed? Jack nodded. Probably. The pause afterward worried everyone. Probably? It means somebody has to go outside. Nobody volunteered. Jack didn't blame them. The storm above them sounded like a freight train rolling across the mountain. Duke stood. Immediately. The shepherd limped to Jack's side. Ready. Jack shook his head. Not this time. Duke ignored him. Again. The dog stared toward the tunnel, waiting. The way soldiers waited for orders. The way partners waited for each other. Hours later, the situation worsened. Condensation appeared along part of the ceiling. Water dripped onto the floor near the rear wall. A faint heaviness settled into the air. Not enough to panic people. Enough for Jack to notice. A few children began coughing. Nothing severe. Yet, the shelter was warning them. Jack spent another hour studying Harold's maps. Finally, he found it. A secondary ventilation shaft. Smaller. Hidden. Built as emergency redundancy. Smart. Very smart. Harold Vance had planned for failure. The secondary shaft exited somewhere higher on the ridge. If they could reach it, they might save everyone. Jack folded the map. I'm going. Travis stood immediately. So am I. Several heads turned. Nobody expected that. Neither did Jack. You don't have to. Travis met his eyes. These people are here because I couldn't protect my own place. The admission hung in the room. Raw. Honest. For once. Jack studied him. Then nodded. Fine. The preparations were simple. Rope. Lantern. Ice tools. Extra gloves. Nothing complicated. Outside, complexity got people killed. Before dawn, they opened the door. The mountain exploded inward. Wind screamed through the tunnel. Snow swirled around them. Cold punched through every layer of clothing. Duke pushed forward immediately. No, the shepherd continued. Duke, still moving. The dog stopped only after placing himself directly between Jack and the storm, exactly where he intended to stay. Jack looked down at him. The old shepherd's injured leg trembled slightly. His paws still carried healing cuts. He should have been resting. Instead, he was volunteering. Again. Jack exhaled. Stay close. That was all. The three of them stepped into the blizzard. The world had vanished. No horizon. No sky. Only white. Jack clipped the rope around his waist. Travis secured the other end. They moved slowly. One step. Plant. Check. Repeat. Combat engineers learned to trust process. Process kept panic away. The ridge was almost impossible to see. Fortunately, Duke didn't need to see it. He found it. The shepherd moved ahead through the snow, nose working despite the wind. Several times Jack lost sight of him completely. Each time the dog reappeared. Leading. Guiding. Determined. After nearly 30 minutes, they found the vent. Or rather, they found the mound covering it. A massive drift had sealed the opening. Ice locked everything together. Jack and Travis started digging. Snow, ice, snow, ice. Again and again. Their gloves froze. Their beards iced over. Their fingers ached. The mountain fought every inch. Then came a deep crack. Above them, both men froze. Instinct. The sound was wrong. A tree, a large one, breaking under snow load. "Duke!" The shepherd turned. Too late. The pine came down through the storm. Not directly, but close enough. A heavy branch slammed into the ridge and exploded through the drift. Snow erupted. The ground shifted. Jack lost footing. The rope snapped tight. Travis shouted something that vanished in the wind. Then Duke disappeared. 1 second he was there. The next he wasn't. Gone. Swallowed by white. Jack's heart stopped. "Duke!" No answer. He dropped to one knee and searched desperately. Nothing. Only blowing snow. Duke. Still nothing. The fear hit harder than anything he had felt since Emily's funeral. Not fear for himself. Fear for the one companion who had never left. Who had found the hill. Who had saved children. Who had stood beside him through every nightmare. Jack ripped off one glove and plunged his hand into the snow, searching, digging, ignoring the cold, ignoring everything. Then his fingers touched fur. "Duke!" He dug faster. Travis joined him. Together, they cleared the drift. A dark shape emerged beneath the snow. The shepherd lay motionless, one side of his body buried beneath ice and powder. Jack dropped beside him. For one terrible second, nothing moved. Then Duke opened one eye, weakly, slowly. But he opened it. Jack let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. The dog was alive. Barely, but alive. And above them, somewhere inside the buried mountain, 32 people were still waiting for air. Jack slid both arms under Duke's chest and pulled him close. The shepherd's breath came shallow against his coat. Snow clung to his whiskers. One ear lay flat. The other lifted weakly at the sound of Jack's voice. "Stay with me, buddy." Duke's tail moved once. Barely, but enough. Travis looked from the dog to the buried vent, then back to the shelter entrance, hidden somewhere below the ridge. "We still have to clear it." Jack knew. Every second mattered. He also knew Duke could not stay out here. The storm didn't care what a dog had done. The storm took what was left unprotected. Jack wrapped Duke in his outer coat and dragged him behind the lee of a fallen pine. Travis tied one end of the rope around the dog's harness and secured the other to a buried root so the wind couldn't pull him farther down the slope. Duke tried to lift his head. Jack placed a hand against his neck. Down. For once, Duke obeyed. Jack turned back to the vent. He and Travis dug like men trying to outrun a clock they couldn't see. Ice cracked beneath the iron bar. Snow collapsed around their knees. The wind shoved them sideways again and again, but neither stopped. Then the bar punched through. A dark hole opened beneath the ice. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then the mountain inhaled. A deep rush of air pulled downward through the shaft, strong enough to tug loose snow into the opening. Somewhere beneath them, inside the hidden chamber, the shelter began to breathe again. Jack closed his eyes, only for a heartbeat. Then he went back for Duke. By the time they reached the entrance tunnel, Jack's hands had gone numb, and Travis's face was streaked with ice. Boyd and 2 other men pulled them inside by the rope. The door slammed shut. Warmth wrapped around them, but Jack didn't feel it. He carried Duke straight to the stove and laid him on the thickest blanket they had. The whole chamber went quiet. Lily crawled from beside Eleanor and sat near the dog's head. Caleb McKenna stood behind his mother with red eyes and a torn sleeve. Travis's son, still feverish, watched from beneath a blanket. Nobody spoke. Jack checked Duke's ribs, his leg, his spine. The branch had struck hard, but not cleanly enough to break him. There was swelling along the shoulder, a cut above the ribs, and the old rear leg injury had worsened. Duke opened his eyes. Jack's hand froze. The shepherd looked at him, then gave a slow blink. A sound moved through the shelter. Not a cheer. Something softer. People breathing again. Jack bowed his head over Duke for a moment, one hand buried in the fur at his neck. No words came. None that were useful. Duke simply leaned into his palm. The storm lasted 3 more days, but after the vent was cleared, the shelter held. The air stayed clean. The stove burned steady. The limestone wall kept its slow warmth. People slept without coughing. Children stopped shivering. Wet clothes dried along a rope near the tunnel. And every morning Jack checked the shafts before he checked himself. Duke did not walk much. He lay near the stove, wrapped in blankets, accepting scraps of pork and bits of bread from children who treated him like a wounded general. But whenever someone approached the door, his ears still moved first. Even hurt, he listened. When the storm finally broke, it did not end with drama. The wind simply fell silent one morning. A pale sun touched the ridge. Snow glittered across the bitterroots like broken glass. By afternoon, rescue crews reached the hidden entrance. They expected loss. They found 32 people alive under the hill. Word traveled faster than the thaw. Elk Ridge learned about the veteran who had organized the shelter, the German shepherd who had found it, the old buried station built by Harold Vance, and men who had understood winter before the valley forgot. Travis Nolan told the story himself at the town hall 2 weeks later. He stood in front of people who knew what he had done to Jack, and his voice shook only once. "He saved my boy," Travis said. "After I took his home, he opened a door for mine." Jack sat in the back row. Duke lay at his feet, one rear leg stretched stiffly to the side. When people turned to look, Jack looked down at the dog instead. A man could survive praise the same way he survived cold, by not standing in it too long. Spring came slowly, then summer. The people of Elk Ridge returned to the hill with tools, lumber, maps, and food stores. They cleared the shafts properly, reinforced the entrance, restocked the shelves, marked routes from the lower cabins to the ridge. The old Cold Ridge shelter became official, but nobody called it that. Not after what happened. On the first morning of the next winter, before the first real snow, the town gathered at the hillside. Jack stood beside the restored timber door with Duke leaning against his leg. The dog was grayer now, slower. His walk carried a permanent limp, but his eyes stayed bright. A wooden sign had been mounted above the entrance. Duke, Ridge, Winter, Shelter. No one clapped at first. They just stood there, reading the words. Then Lily stepped forward and placed one small hand on Duke's head. The old shepherd accepted it with dignity. Later, as people drifted back down the trail, Caleb McKenna looked up at Jack. What if Duke hadn't barked that night? Jack studied the ridge, the trees, the door, the thin line of smoke rising from the hidden vent. Then, he looked down at Duke. The shepherd was already watching the hill, ears lifted, as if listening for something no one else could hear. Jack rested his hand on Duke's neck. "It wasn't about whether Duke would bark," he said quietly. "It was about whether I was wise enough to listen. And now I'd like to ask you something. If you had been standing in that storm, would you have followed the road like everyone else? Or would you have trusted the dog? Comment 1 if you would have trusted Duke. Comment 0 if you would have stayed on the road. I read as many comments as I can, and I'd love to know what you would have done. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. There are many more unforgettable stories of courage, loyalty, survival, and the incredible bond between veterans and their dogs waiting for you right here. Until the next story. Take care of yourself, take care of the people you love, and never ignore the voice or the bark that might be trying to lead you home.